Hello, and thank you for watching this presentation of my paper for this year's Midwest Sociological Society meetings. My paper is entitled Redacting Herbert Spencer, and my name is Kurt Borchard, University of Nebraska, Kearney. Here, in this work, I want to redact or remove, re-edit, and reduce an original source, the writing of Herbert Spencer, a canonical figure in sociology, in order to create poetic and imaginative ways of conceptualizing the discipline. Redaction has become popular through the Bush and Trump administrations as a way of controlling information. In 2019, the world saw the release of a redacted version of Special Counsel Robert Mueller's reports to Congress, followed by the president's claim that the report fully exonerated him. The satellite and televisually relayed testimony and news coverage served as a worldwide real-time display of Power's intrinsic links to claims of authorship and meaning. Spencer, a major figure in sociology, was a well-to-do Victorian male. He used deductive logic, organizing his facts to support evolutionary-based explanations of human social order, and hegemonically promoted a thoroughly racist, imperialist ideology. Such imperialists are, it should always be remembered, the founders of sociology. Their work, then, should be deconstructed and reconfigured. I want to deploy redaction, therefore, to rediscipline, reconfigure, and/or fragment the power of such canonical material. Through reimagining positivism and grand theory as poetry, surprising and open-ended material might result. Perhaps this regrounding of the discipline of sociology can help us imagine this as an always-already discipline involving art as much as science, interpretation as much as truth, and power as much as knowledge. Herbert Spencer was a good friend of Charles Darwin, a key figure in late Victorian-era emphasis on science, and Spencer is often the one who should be credited with the phrase survival of the fittest. He used deductive logic, organizing his facts to support evolutionary-based explanations of human social order, an argument hegemonically producing and reproducing imperialist ideologies. Lewis Koser notes that Spencer received no formal schooling as a child, nor did he earn a college degree. He, quote, never read widely in philosophy, history, or literature, unquote. Huxley's laughing remark that for Spencer, the definition of a tragedy was the spectacle of deduction killed by a stubborn fact. England had largely been the initiators of global colonialism and industrialization. Spencer believed evolution had placed the British as the conquerors and rightful leaders of the world. He lived the prime of his life in the Victorian era, and unlike the social conditions of Comte or Marx, Spencer lived in a society that was peaceful, stable, and well off. It then suited him to find theories like those of Malthus, Lamarck, and Darwin, biologically based arguments he could turn to explain Britain's dominance as natural. In his Principles of Sociology, Spencer regularly wrote of, quote, inferior varieties, unquote, of races, quote, uncivilized races, unquote, quote, savages, unquote, quote, barbarous people, unquote, quote, men of rude types, unquote, and other denigrations of non-Western peoples. It was rather remarkable when I read it how consistent he was in this language and position. He socialized in a circle of scientific friends and associates. I found some different quotes about him that I thought were very telling. Here's a long one. There's no doubt that Spencer pursued his work in the manner of an engineer, which he was, who searches for relevant facts to be fitted into a preconceived scheme. The scheme was never questioned or revised in the light of other conceptions, yet it was not woven out of whole cloth. Influenced particularly by Malthus and Adam Smith, his bigotry under the guise of evolution was also fused with free market liberalism that, quote, the best government was a government that governed least, unquote. Here I want to suggest that as contemporary sociologists, perhaps we might also rewrite the history of our discipline through redaction, harvesting and harnessing new meanings from canonical texts, rewriting, removing, and editing out the words we don't like. Canonical figures like Spencer helped support that racist colonialist worldview that so dominated one part of history, arguing that dominant societies were dominant as a result of nature. He used science as a support and scaffolding to uphold Western culture as true and right, showing that, in a Darwinian sense, things are as they should be. His work is taught to this day under the guise of sociological theory, albeit through critical interpretations. Again, I wanted to read the work in the original and decided that redaction would be a useful way of reconfiguring the work. Reviewing Spencer's work, I was reminded how powerful people like to reproduce knowledge that reaffirms their ideology and position of power. Trump's anti-government and nationalist bent could be viewed in a way as Spencer's wine, now in a new bottle. Secular and liberally oriented, Spencer believed the British were not chosen by God, but by nature to be dominant. Trump's staff wanted to edit a report highly critical of the president, Mueller's report about Russian interference in the election. Trump, as always, wants not just to reclaim the narrative, but shout down and belittle anyone offering a critical assessment of his dominance. Trump wants to reclaim what conservatives might characterize as a social order that had gone against nature. Make America Great Again was his dog whistle calling to his base to reclaim an anti-globalist, anti-multiculturalist, and anti-egalitarian past. According to Kozer, Spencer, quote, reacted with horror and dismay, unquote, as the Victorian era closed, and toward the end of the century, Britain began losing its global trade dominance in the United States and Germany. Such change did not fit his theory, countering all of the facts he so assiduously collected in support of a previously dominant social order, that of the British Empire. To quote Michel Foucault, power is dispersed. And today, what I wanted to do was to think through what his power was through his phrasing and his canonical work, and then reframe it. Here I wanted to use Spencer's words in sequence to destabilize and reopen not just his thinking, but also the idea of what sociology might be. This has been ongoing, of course, since Spencer's time, but perhaps is a nice point at which to see the origins and where we're at now. The idea of quoting an authority of a discipline back to reframe, reimagine, and perhaps undermine the basis of the discipline is an exercise further emphasizing the precariousness of our shared understandings today. Sociology can be understood as a product of both rhetoric and reason, imagination and empiricism. Also, too, I wanted to try some innovative methodologies. One method that I could say here could be called found sociology. In literature, found poetry refers to the creation of poetry from portions of written or spoken material found in everyday life. Erasure poetry, another term, employs the removal of words from an original source to create a new work. Finally, I could use the concept of bricolage, which was employed by Dick Hebdige in cultural studies, in order to talk about innovative recombinations of material in order to discover new meanings. Now I'll read a bit of the poetry to you. This is all derived from The Principles of Sociology by Herbert Spencer, published in 1898. The first poem is a playful question about the basis of knowledge within sociology, taken from the first page preface to his work. Sociology is already so great. Nearly every thought is expressed in words. It has many words and multitudinous quotations from numerous authors. The thread of the argument is that they are there to be looked at. So a little bit about the self-referential quality of Spencer's work and also knowledge itself. The author's name and the race referred to being given, I decided to omit them. Insofar as evidence furnished by the uncivilized races is concerned, facts from other sources had to be sought out and incorporated. Some of his work I thought could be reframed as commentary on our contemporary world, like our tendencies as people to engage in environmental degradation, a ruinous practice, and how we seem to be very good at that as a species. Alterations of climate caused by social growth, as where a rainy region is made less rainy by destroying the forests. Social growth, replacing plants not conductive to it, causing in time injurious species, fostering useful species, more advantageous to society. Here's one of my favorites. 80-ton guns, able at first only to eke out gestures, but eventually expressing involved conceptions with precision. Concomitantly, knowledge ending in science. More environmentalism that I found. The silence of the forests yield proofs of great advances in hot regions in recent times. An abundant supply of light and heat during those first stages of progress. Climate variability affects human activities and brings indirect impediments to civilization. A parched surface and a scanty vegetation, like toasted quills and gunpowder. A truth in respect to climate. Societies can survive only where the circumstances are least trying. Spencer derived his information from many sources, and the different sources, I think, make for interesting phrasing for his work and the poetry here. The degree of correspondence between space and time, the law of emotional progress. Out of the ideas of an Australian mine, Egyptian stock, and mortgage bonds on an Indian railway. Spencer wasn't terribly reflexive, so I thought I'd add that to some of his work. Manifest remembering the sentiment, presentative, presentative representative, representative and re-representative, the wider range reached by representations. Exact equality between objects, between thoughts and things, involves representations adjusted to realities, a representativeness in the environment, in movement, unlike any that ever before acted. Sometimes a poem would undermine the very points Spencer himself was trying to make. Among the partially civilized races, we find imitativeness a marked trait, grotesque mimicry, an aptitude for imitation, love of imitation, a capacity to imitate, mimicking men and animals, ingenious in imitating, imitate animal sounds, admirable mimics, can imitate exactly, proneness to mimicry, extraordinary tendency to imitate. They will repeat each word in any sentence, mimicking the manner and attitude of the speaker. A species, say trout, common trout, conceive of fish as a class, imagine various kinds of fish, and see mentally the likenesses which unite them notwithstanding. Rational surprise reached the belief at variance with this belief. A vacant indifference which struck you with general ideas without those general ideas. The last two. Cardinal difficulties, obvious a priori, compelled wife-stealing as a practice, how the tribes get wived by taking one another's women, robbing others in excess, get enough wives, and carry on the process. The silliness of all this presenting itself as science would sometimes strike me. He was nicknamed Hund, John Hund, Henry Hund, etc. Generations would have established surnames, nicknames derived from animals, become the names of the animals they are named after. These metamorphoses of animals into those animal metamorphoses which really take place explain feelings between men and animals. Conclusion. Perhaps contemporary forms of redaction can save sociology from how at least one of its founders conceived of it, as a disciplinary tool legitimating dominance and oppression, naturalizing it, and asserting it as truth. Truth, for Spencer, came in the form of preconceived worldviews, maintaining the status quo, using science as a way of fitting facts into what was presented as simply a positivist framework of the world as it is, a supposed neutrality cloaking justifications for colonialism, racism, and self-enrichment. Although Spencer's original work is hardly read today, discourses such as Spencer's are never eradicated. They lie in wait as frameworks for dominant groups to reassert their dominance, undermining democracy and against diversity. They play now to those who see themselves as the legitimate heirs of dominance, racial and economic, now seeing themselves as victims of globalization and conspiracies. They find masters in those who claim to represent them and their interests. They construct community through the destruction of support systems for all. They present alternative facts and reframe realities to fit their notions, shielded from all criticisms and a world they fear, increasingly full of minority others. My redaction of Spencer's work to create poetry reimagines the oppressor's words against himself. They reveal the master's tools as tools, tools that can build or destroy. Art can emerge from destruction, art offering different views of our world. Such art is itself a tool, a form of hope. Thank you.